We begin Seder Moed, a Seder that deals with the Yom Tovim, the days of Kedusha that are found throughout the Jewish calendar, which give the Jewish people, both on a national level and on an individual level, special opportunity to come close to Hashem. Each holy festival has its own special character and significance, and how appropriate that Seder Moed begins with Masechta Shabbos, Masechta that deals with the halachos of the day of Shabbos, the gift that we have every week, the day on which we set aside all the mundane endeavors that we are involved in throughout the week and use to contemplate the beauty and power of the creation of the world by the Bari Olam. By observing Shabbos, a Yid testifies to Hashem's awesome act of bringing forth the universe as we know it, ex nihilo, through His Word. As the Pasuk says, Vayachal Elokim bayom hashvi'i malachta asher asah. The seventh day, Hashem's handiwork, His malacha, Maisa Bereshis, was complete, and He, as it were, rested. Hashem therefore sanctified that day, the seventh day of the week. And so forever since then, the atmosphere of the world, each week, the arrival of the seventh day, is different, is special. It has a special Kedusha, and by observing Shabbos each week, a Jew taps into that Kedusha and soaks it up, allowing it to elevate him forever. And what does the observance of Shabbos consist of? As it says in the fourth of the Aseres HaDibros, Zochar es Yom HaShabbos lekadsho, you shall remember the day of Shabbos to sanctify it, which indicates a positive mitzvah to sanctify the day of Shabbos, which is what we accomplish when we recite Kiddush and declare the sanctity of Shabbos. The pasuk then says, Sheishes yomim ta'avod v'asisa kol malachtecha. For 6 days you work and perform your malacha. V'yom hashvi'i Shabbos l'Hashem Elokecha lo sa'aseh chol malacha. But the seventh day is Shabbos for Hashem your God, and on that day you shall not perform malacha. So here we have the negative commandment component of Shmiras Shabbos, in which we are enjoined not to perform malacha on Shabbos. But what does malacha mean? Our Masechta essentially comes to answer that question. The general framework is as follows. Chazal darshan from the fact that the pasuk repeats the mitzvah not to do malacha on Shabbos next to the section that discusses the mitzvah to build the Mishkan, that it is the Mishkan that provides the key clue to understanding what it is that we must refrain from on Shabbos. It is the Torah is telling us that those activities that were performed as part of the construction or functioning of the Mishkan are the activities that we may not perform on Shabbos. Chazal determined that there were 39 types of activities, malachos, that are performed in the construction or functioning of the Mishkan. And so the Torah is telling us that one may not engage in those 39 activities on the day of Shabbos. But the prohibition of malacha is not limited to those particular activities. Rather, the activities enumerated, we'll see later in the Mishnah, form what we call avos malachos categories. And so if we identify an activity that's fundamentally similar to the title of the category, the av malacha, then that activity will be prohibited as well as a tolda, as a derivative, meaning as something that belongs in that category of forbidden malacha. The Masechta begins with a discussion of the malacha of hotzah, malacha that we commonly describe as the malacha of carrying. The way that one would actually be in violation of this malacha is by relocating an object on Shabbos in a meaningful way. Whenever we discuss a potential violation of hotzah, we need to identify the type of halachic domain that we are in. We have two major types of domains. One is Rishus Harabim, the public domain. It's where the public thoroughfare is, and that's not enclosed by partitions. And then there's Rishus HaYachid, a private domain, which means it's an area that is enclosed by halachically valid partitions. So for example, we have an object that, starting out, is at rest in the Rishus HaYachid, in the private domain. The person who puts that object into motion, who picks it up, let's say, then brings that out into the public domain and sets the object down there, he would in that case be in violation of this malacha of hotzah, because his action included all three of the necessary components for this malacha of akira, the lifting of the object from rest, the Shina Rishus, transferring it to the other domain, and finally the Hanacha, bringing the object to rest in the new domain. So it's almost like, keep a checklist and analyze the action. If we can check off all three items, then we are dealing with a full-blown biblical violation of Hotzah. There's also a possibility of violating Hotzah completely within the public domain. If he picks it up at one point, moves it at least 4 amos away, and then puts it down, that later point, that too would be a violation of Hotzah, but our Mishnah will not be concerned with that form of Hotzah. We should note that the word Hotzah literally means bringing the object out. So we have that in the case we just described, where he brought the object out of the enclosed private domain, the Rishus HaYachid, into the Rishus HaRabim. And as we will see in the Mishnah, the truth is that the malacha is equally violated through an act that's, in technical terms, is called Hachnasa, where he's bringing the object from the public domain into the private domain, equally a violation of the malacha of Hotzah. The essential purpose of our Mishnah is, first of all, to convey the halachas we just mentioned, that a complete act of Hotzah in either direction, whether he's carrying out or carrying in, would be a biblical violation of this malacha. In addition, the Mishnah comes to teach us that even in a case where the person did not perform all 3 steps of the malacha, but rather it was, say, a joint effort between him and another person, all 3 steps were performed. Halacha is, in that case, the person will have committed a rabbinic violation of the malacha. It is that although, on the biblical level, if a malacha is done between 2 people, they are exempt. It's called Shnaim Sha'asu. Halacha is that the Rabbanan said it's forbidden to even contribute to the completion of a malacha, so it will be a violation on the rabbinic level. The Mishnah illustrates these principles by imagining a person standing inside his home in Rishus HaYachid. We call the Balabayas, he's the homeowner. And a poor person who is standing outside in the Rishus HaRabim. We imagine him standing outside, coming to ask for some food. And the Mishnah articulates all of the possibilities of how each individual could commit either a biblical or rabbinic violation through transferring something from one domain to the other. So the Mishnah begins, Yitzios HaShabbos shtayim shein arba bifnim ushtayim shein arba b'chutz. Biblically speaking, there are 2 possible ways in which the malach of Hotzah could be violated, but it becomes 4 when we add the 2 possible ways that the person could commit rabbinic violation. First of all, regarding bifnim, the balabayas was standing inside of his home, ushtayim shein arba b'chutz, and this is also true of the person, the ani, standing outside. There are 2 ways that he could commit a biblical violation of the malacha, but it becomes a total of 4 possible violations when we add the additional 2 possible ways that the ani could commit a rabbinic violation of the malacha, where in other words he doesn't do the entire malacha as we explained. The Mishnah elaborates, Ketzad, how so? The Mishnah says, imagine ha'ani omed b'chutz u'balabayis b'fnim. It's Shabbos and there's a poor person standing outside in the street in the Rishus HaRabim. The Balabayis, the homeowner, is standing inside his home, inside his Rishus HaYachid. If Pashat ha'ani es yado lifnim v'nasan l'toch yado shel Balabayis. The first case is where the ani picks up, let's say, his basket that he's using to beg for food. He picks that up from the Rishus HaRabim and brings that into the Rishus HaYachid, meaning he sticks his hand with the basket inside of the home and places it in the homeowner's hand. That, the Mishnah will state, will be a biblical violation, because the ani in this case performed all 3 steps of Akira, Shina, Rishus, and Hanacha. He picked the object up from the Rishus HaRabim, brought it into a different Rishus, the Rishus HaYachid, and performed the Hanacha by setting it into the Balabayas' hand. For halachically, an object is considered to be at rest in a person's hand as long as the hand is in the same Rishus as the person is standing in. So that would be a biblical violation on the ani's part. Oh, shenata mitocha vehotzi. Or let's say the reverse. The Balabayas had a piece of bread in his hand. The ani reached his hand inside and picked the bread up from the Balabayas' hand. So that's Akira. Brought that outside. That's the Shina Rishus. And placed it down on the ground of the Rishus HaRabim, which would be the final step of the Hanacha. The Mishnah states, Ha'ani chayiv u'balabayis pater. Ani in these 2 cases will be chayiv. The word chayiv in this Masechta carries the specific connotation of biblical liability. So we're talking, if it was an inadvertent violation, he would have to bring a korban chatas. If it was on purpose in front of witnesses, he was warned, and he would be liable to the death penalty of skila. Whereas the balabayas in these two scenarios is entirely exempt. He has committed no violation whatsoever because he contributed zero to the steps of the malacha votzah. The Mishnah now explains the two ways that the balabayas could commit a biblical violation of votzah. That is, if pasha balabayas is yado lachutz v'nosan litoch yado shel ani. First case is the balabayas inside picked up, say, some bread from inside his home, so that's the akira from the Rosh Hashanah, and brought it outside, so that's the change of domain, placed it down into the ani's hand. There we have the hanacha. That would be a biblical violation on the part of the balabayas. So shenata mitocha v'hichnis, or conversely, the balabayas extended his hand outside and picked up the basket that was in the ani's hand, and brought that inside and set that down inside his Rosh Hashanah. In both of these cases, balabayas chayiv ani pater. Balabayas would be fully liable for having committed the complete act of votzah, but the ani would be exempt, having performed none of the parts of the malacha. The Mishnah now explains how the balabayas and the ani are each able to commit a rabbinic violation of the malacha in two ways. The Mishnah says, if pashat ha'ani es yado lifnim, the ani picked up his basket from the Rosh Hashanah, extended that into the house. But then v'nata balabayas mitocha, balabayas within took that from him, and he placed it down. So here the ani performed the akira, the balabayas performed the conclusion of the melacha, the hanacha, the putting it down. Oh, shenasan lisocha v'hotzi, or conversely, the ani stuck his hand into the house, and the balabayas picked up the bread and placed it into the ani's hand. The ani then proceeded to bring that outside and put it down. So here the balabayas performed the akira, the ani performed the hanacha. The Mishnah rules shnehem peturin. They are both exempt, meaning neither is biblically liable. But the term pater in this Masechta has the connotation that the person is not biblically liable, but has committed a rabbinic violation. And that is the case here because each of them did contribute meaningfully to the malacha. They performed one of the steps, either the akira or the hanacha. And thus, that's a rabbinic violation. The Mishnah continues, there are other possible ways they could commit rabbinic violation. That is, it pashat bal habayis es yado lachutz v'notel ha'ani mitocha. Let's say the balabayas picked up the bread and extended that outside. So he did, you could say almost like 2/3 of the malacha by picking it up and changing its domain. But the ani did the rest. The ani took it from him at that point and put it down in the Rosh Hashanah. Or we could discuss where the balabayas stuck his hand outside. The ani picked up his basket from the Rosh Hashanah and put that in the balabayas' hand, which he then drew back into his house, and he then put the basket down. So here again, the ani only did that first step of the akira, and the balabayas did the rest, changed its domain and put it down in the new domain, in contrast to previous scenario in which the ani was the one who did 2/3 of the malacha, if you will. In this case as well, the Mishnah states, Shnei and Peturin, both are biblically exempt because neither performed all three parts of the malacha, but they both have committed a rabbinic violation for having meaningfully contributed to the malacha. And the Mishnah has just presented 4 cases, and in all 4 cases, both the ani and the balabayas committed a rabbinic violation. So why does the Mishnah say that for each of them it's 2 that are 4, meaning that each could commit 2 biblical violations plus only 2 rabbinic violations, when the Mishnah just described that they could each actually commit 4 rabbinic violations? And the Mefarshim discussed this. The Rabbi Bartanura's answer is that the Tana of the Mishnah is only counting the number of ways in which each person could commit the rabbinic violation where the person performed the akira. The first step of the malacha of picking the object up, in that case, is of particular concern. If a person were permitted to do the beginning of the malacha, he might complete the malacha. So the Tana of the Mishnah only counts those 2 instances of rabbinic violation, even though in truth, the contribution of completing the malacha as well, placing it down, would be a rabbinic violation as well, so that technically, it's 2 yitzios that are 6, because with all of these cases, there are 4 ways in which they could each commit rabbinic violations and add that to the two biblical violations.